it probably would even be better for like my recording or whatever. So this should.
I feel like it feels a little bit less like intimidating.
That's
and informal.
Super comfortable with that. I hate that these.
That's like more for my benefit, honestly. Because the second I stand up, then I feel really like uncomfortable.
No, I I'm gonna pull up this now.
I'm like so high off the ground.
Let's see. Well, I've got like, oh, there we go. Yep. I've got like baby heels on. So. Oh man, I forgot how hot these buildings are. I'm used to like dressing for my office, which is freezing.
I have one class that's like across from ComArt. It's not in the engineering building, but I don't even know what it's called. But literally, it'd be like 90 degrees outside, and it would be hotter in the classroom than it was outside. It's like,
I had a political philosophy class in like Farrell, right by the biomed building, and it was exactly like that. Like I remember walking in the winter and like literally having to wear like a tank top because it was so hot in there. Yeah.
My freshman year, I had a class in Giltner, I think it is, and the professor would literally bring a thermometer to class, and if it got up past 85, she'd like, see you guys.
Yeah.
The questions that have, so if you want to pull that up right now, so I mentioned this in the email, but the way this is basically going to work is that we're going to kind of go through the order that's on the document. So when you see that we're on your question and there's like, then you're going to be the one asking our guest the question. And then I'm going to be kind of like crossing out questions as, because when you answer one question, it might actually end up answering a couple of different questions. So I'll kind of cross them off as we go along. So you might get to your question and find that it's crossed off. That's because it's already kind of been answered. So, and if there was an aspect of it that didn't get answered, we'll hopefully have some time at the end to kind of ask extra questions. But and I might also be moving some of them down towards the end just to make sure that we kind of cover the main bigger topics. So does that make sense? So I'll give you a minute to do that. Everybody got the list of questions up? Everybody still getting that up? So welcome. So is Caitlin or is that okay?
Yeah,
so
Caitlin.
Caitlin and Andrew.
Anderson.
Oh, Anderson! Oh my gosh, sorry. We have two Andrews in this class, so I'm like already, and I was like looking at attendance. I know you, Anderson.
Yep.
I had Anderson in 201 a couple years ago, so yes, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So do you want to do a quick intro and remind us they've looked at your kind of professional profiles, but remind us what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Caitlin, and I graduated from MSU in 2016. I double majored in English and professional writing on the Communities and Cultures track. After I graduated, I was the marketing and communication specialist for the Community Foundation in Lansing, And then I started my current job, which is with the Michigan Credit Union League in December of last year. So my title is Web and Social Media Specialist. Basically what that means is I handle any of our kind of like digital communication and marketing, so that involves like implementing the social media strategy, making the social media strategy because we didn't have one, putting together all of that content, scheduling it out and posting it, handling the website. I also help our editor with some like print publication work. I've done ad copy with our graphic designers, so pretty much whatever they need me to do, I do.
I'm Anderson. I'm an XA student here doing experience architecture and computer science. I actually started doing development work in this class, just like you guys. I do web development for the College of Arts and Letters, really focusing on accessibility, doing auditing and remediation for the college, and then also external vendor products of MSU. And then I also help teach the iOS design lab on campus, teaching kids Swift development and iOS development, which all of you guys, if you're interested in development, should really sign up for that. It's a really awesome experience. You get to meet people with Apple, interact with people from Apple, and then they take you from identifying a problem that you care about and then solving it. And it might be developing an app, but it also might just be coming up with another way to help solve the problem.
I'm going to close these windows just because we are recording this, so I don't want there to be any noise. Also, why don't we go around the room and just say your name, your majors, and then what you're thinking about doing in the future professionally, at least at this moment. You want to start with you? Okay, no, it's you.
What was the questions again?
Your name, your major, and then what you want to do professionally in the future, at least at this moment.
My name is Lynette Rios, major is XA, and something I want to do in the future is, right now at the moment, thinking about getting my master's in architecture.
My name's Maddie. I'm a journalism junior, and I'm going to be adding XA. But for the future, I think that I want to do journalism with like a little bit of XA knowledge sprinkled in there.
I'm Arbok, and I'm studying at CQ. In the future, I want to do something in web design.
My name's Drew. Major is interdisciplinary humanities, and it's part English and professional writing. And professionally, no clue yet. So.
My name's Sierra. I'm double majoring in professional writing and English, and I'd like to get into like the editing and publishing field.
My name is Sam. I'm double majoring in professional writing and communications with a German minor, and I either want to work for a car company or I want to go into politics.
I'm Mo. I am an XA major, and I'm currently interested in trying to work on bringing VR and how we can implement that into usability.
My name's Will. I'm an XA major, and in the future I'm trying to do like web development.
My name's Andrew. I'm an XA, and I'd like to do something with web design.
My name's Andrew. I'm an XA major, and I'm probably interested in something in web development.
I'm Katrina. I'm a PW major, and I'm interested in doing film.
I'm Leah. I'm a double major in professional writing and English and creative writing. What I want to do in the future, I think my options open right now, but I like to get into editing.
I'm Kaylee. I'm an XA major, and I would like to do something with project management.
I'm Jackie. I'm a professional writing major, and I'm planning something with editing and publishing.
I'm Mariah. I'm a professional writing major, and I want to go into like creative directing with web design.
I'm Lauren. I'm an XA major, and I'd like to do something with graphic design.
I'm Phoebe. I'm an XA major, and in the future, maybe like web design and publishing.
I'm Zach, XA major. I'm not sure yet. Probably freelance web design stuff.
Okay, thank you. So we want to start off with our first question.
What would you say is the most important part of your job?
Man.
Little question to begin with.
Yeah, so I guess the most important part of my job, like in terms of like actual tasks, are like skills.
Probably tasks.
Okay, so I think our CEO is very, he's very like digitally aware. Like if something is not up immediately, like on social media or on the website, then he gets very anxious. So I think probably the most important thing in my job is just making sure that our social media channels are, that they're timely and that we're getting everything out that needs to be out. I know that's kind of like a big answer, but it's basically just like timeliness of web content updates.
For me, it's communication. There's a lot of people that, you know, don't understand development jargon and different things like that. So being able to effectively communicate like ideas and what I'm doing to the people around me, and then also staying organized with my thoughts and just being able to execute things and prioritize things that need to be done now and things that might take longer and save them for later.
What would you say is the best part of your job?
For me, I would say it's like really the freedom to be able to kind of make what I want to make, not necessarily like, okay, like, hey, just go build whatever website you want, but, you know, just being able to put the input and see something from an idea to the end point and be able to execute it in between.
Yeah, I think like my favorite part of working in digital communications and like social media management is kind of like being able to use my knowledge of creating digital spaces, but also like the creativity from majoring in English, being like a creative writing concentration. So like with social media especially, you have a lot of freedom to be a little bit more playful with your communications. That's kind of where the human side of an organization's brand can kind of come out. So I think being able to balance brand identity with having fun and like taking risks with your communications is a lot of fun.
How difficult do you find it working with people that don't really know much about web design?
It can depend on the person. So I think generally my experiences have been that people are pretty like open to hearing your expertise when it's something that they don't know a lot about. I think one of the biggest barriers that I have faced in my professional experiences so far is being really knowledgeable in that field, but also still being like oftentimes the youngest person in my office. And so being able to project the right kind of like authority and get kind of like the respect to be trusted to be an expert in something. I think generally people like, honestly, the stereotype, they look at me whenever there's something web related, they're like, oh, the millennial will know, which is terrible, and like I hate it, but at the same time it's kind of like, okay, well that's what I studied, so I hate that I'm like validating your stereotype. So I think generally people are receptive. I think the biggest thing is just being confident in your abilities, like reinforcing that, and like knowing that really at the end of the day, what you both should want is the right kind of solution for your company, for your client, for whoever you're working for.
Same. It really depends on the person. I found, like in my own experience, that like people who know absolutely nothing about web development, those are the ones that are usually the hardest to work with. Usually when somebody knows a little bit about web development, then they're really open to like ideas and stuff. One thing when you're working with people, especially people who don't know a lot about web development, you really have to be upfront with them about the sort of scope of the work that you're going to do and what is expected of you and what is expected of them. So say you're working with a client and they want you to redesign the website, but you don't know anything about their brand. You need to let them know that they need to supply all the content to you, because otherwise somebody who doesn't know anything about web development thinks that as a developer, you're the designer, the content creator, the accessibility auditor, the whole everything. And then when it comes down to the end of the project and you're like, you guys never gave me any content, then there's a little like dilemma there because they didn't understand the sort of work that you were doing.
I think also like kind of going along with that, managing expectations, because the amount of times I'll have someone from like our events team email me and ask for some update to be made to the website, or like, you know, for like to completely overhaul the way that something looks, like helping people understand that just because that's your skill set and like part of your job is managing that content, it doesn't mean that you're just like a wizard who can do everything and like do it in 10 minutes. And honestly, if all else fails, like sometimes it helps with the people who, at least in my experience, with the people who sometimes don't understand the complexity or the scope of that type of work. Like if you start explaining stuff and like throw out a couple of like really weird like jargony words, then sometimes I've found that gives people enough pause where they're like, oh, I really don't know anything about this. Then you can kind of like back up and explain it in a way that they understand, or they can also kind of understand that, like, you know, that's your skill set. You're doing the best you can.
Where do you find your design inspiration?
For me, just like everywhere, every day, just ask questions. Why? Like, why is this computer sitting here, right here, like this? Like, I don't know. Just be curious, be questionable. Like, why is the bike rack the way it is? I don't know. Just think about different things. How could it be different? Like, just ask questions.
Yeah, I think something that was helpful for me was, I think it was WRA 360, which was my doc design class. I think like we had a project where it was that we had to look for designs that we really liked and designs that we really didn't like. And so I think definitely just being aware of what's around you, being aware of the way that, you know, like pieces that are meant to communicate something to you, like how effectively they're doing that, why what they're doing is or isn't effective. Also, the graphic designer at the league loaned me this really cool book, and I cannot remember the title of it for the life of me, but it was all about like finding design and art like in everyday life outside. So like there were chapters about, you know, ghost signs, which is like, you know, when there was something painted on a wall like a long time ago and it was left there, and you can kind of like observe, you know, typography patterns and even just like manhole covers. So I think kind of like understanding the exceptionality in like everyday things like that, and seeing how like literally everything we encounter is designed for an experience, and trying to break that down.
When is it appropriate to chase design trends or use traditional methods for design?
That's a tough one. You just kind of gotta think about it, figure out where, what are you doing? Are you trying to rebuild a system to do something new, or are you trying to fix an old system that, you know, is not working? You just kind of gotta play it by ear a little bit and go with the flow.
Yeah, I think kind of with that, just balancing the needs of the project, like the needs of the brand that you're working with. I think like in my experience, especially with the league, because like we work with credit unions, and a lot of them can be very slow on the uptake with things like digital design, with things like mobile spaces, social media, and so kind of like balancing keeping things familiar enough where people aren't like panicking and it's not like a complete overhaul, because that's rarely the best solution, at least in my experience, but also having enough of a twist where it's something fresh, where there's something a little bit unexpected. I think the most effective things that we've done at the league have been a kind of a combination of both, like being able to have that traditional framework where it's something familiar and still accessible for people who might not be there yet in terms of, you know, digital spaces, in terms of the latest and greatest with design, but having just a little bit of a sprinkling in there. And that comes down to having a good team that knows how to balance that.
I got another one for you. What are some current web development design trends you like the most? And then there's another question, how are roles and responsibilities divided on the design team?
For me, the design, like, roles and responsibilities, it just depends on the project and where you are. Like, one team might be set up where you have a UX, UI designer and you're working with a team of developers and stuff. And I've been on other projects where I was the only one who knew anything about UX and UI, so I had to take the role of designing, even though I would consider myself more of a developer.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends. So like in my first job, I was a one-person marketing and communications team. So pretty much I had to have my hand in a little bit of everything. And then that culture was very much like directive-based in terms of the communication. So like I would get direction from higher up and then I would just kind of like regurgitate it out. Whereas now I'm actually part of a communications team. So like we have a graphic designer who also has experience with UI UX. It's so nice to have someone else on your team who like understands that stuff. Like it's so nice to have someone who has a strong sense of design and who can kind of like be that second kind of like, you know, set of eyes. Like one of the very first things that I worked on at the league was a web and like communications campaign opposing a payday lending expansion bill that went through the House, which sounds so boring when you say it out loud. And so one of the, like I was literally not even a month into my job and we had to build a microsite and just kind of like have all of this information, have it be like super meticulous in terms of like language and everything, because you know you want to avoid lawsuits, you want to make sure that you're representing the legislation properly, but you're also wanting to make sure that the call to action is there to oppose this. So it was really nice when we were working on developing a kind of like framework for that website, when we were deciding what it would look like. It was nice to have that second set of eyes and that second person who had the expertise, because like nobody's perfect and you're always going to miss something. And it was just it was great too, because you know he'd been at the league a year longer than me, so he had just additional knowledge of the scope and of the brand and of how that needed to be done. So it really depends. Yeah.
Some web technologies that I think are trending right now that I really like is React, which is a JavaScript framework that Facebook made. And it's really great because it's super easy to build reusable UIs and different things with dynamic content, but also like you got many big companies using it, so if you learn those skills, it's very applicable to the industry. So like Facebook made it, but eBay, PayPal, Airbnb, like all the top companies that you can think of, like your apps on your phone or their website is built in React and React Native. So React is like a web technology JavaScript framework, and React Native is the same essential thing, but it's for your mobile experience. And then the like benefit to using something like React over like Swift or like Android and Java for Android development is that like you can build one app and then it will run on both Android and iOS. But the trick with that is like, so iOS and Android, they have specific APIs, things that let the app know, like for a user for a screen reader, different things going on within the app. And like with React, because it's outside of like Google didn't make it for Android and Apple didn't make it for iOS, that you have to really be aware of the sort of accessibility issues that could be within the app and make sure you add the code that needs to be within the apps.
Okay, so what skills were you able to kind of teach yourself, and then what skills did you kind of learn in classes or in like other work experiences?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it was kind of a little bit of both for everything. So in terms of like coding and like the digital communications experience that I have, the first experience that I ever had with code was WRA 210, and it was like really scary because I was in a class where like there were a lot of like people who had already been developing and coding, and I was like, oh cool, I'm the dumbest person in here. And so then what ended up happening is it was like right after we learned how to do a hyperlink, which for me was like this watershed moment. I thought it was so cool to make a link, and now I'm like, okay, yeah, that's really easy. So then I started learning things outside of class. Like I used Code Academy a lot to kind of like get myself up to a higher level with HTML so I could like start building pages, and then I started teaching myself CSS before we started learning it in class because I wanted to know how to make stuff look nice. I touched JavaScript a little bit. I haven't had a lot of need for that yet because I'm more on the communication side versus the development side. And then I think as far as implementation, that's what I really learned a lot of when I started getting into professional spaces. A lot of what I learned about like social media management, about like website management happened in professional experiences. So I started freelance web designing, I think it was in my junior year at MSU, and so then that's when I kind of started learning how to manage projects, like how to kind of like incorporate user experience when it comes to building a website versus just like making something that I think looks nice. And then, you know, getting into a job where part of my job was to manage like a brand on social media, learning how to, you know, make good content, but also like work with the algorithms, you know, work with the way that, you know, Google search results happen, like the way that Facebook prioritizes or deprioritizes things just like depending on the words that you use, on the way that you link something, on the way that content is pushed out, like the frequency. I think I learned a lot more of that in my current role because it's a lot more web centric, whereas my previous role, like I said, was just kind of a little bit of everything. So it's like I touched everything on the surface, but I didn't really get to dive into anything very deeply. I also worked on an AdWords certification and social media marketing certification, so that helped me get a lot more of the technical knowledge of those platforms, because obviously like being someone who's younger and being someone who's trained in effective communications, like it's not hard to make social media or even like web spaces that are okay. But having like kind of like investing your time and effort into kind of some of those continuing education opportunities where you're getting a little bit more understanding about current trends, about just like how technical social media actually is, like in terms of algorithms and in terms of maximizing your engagement and maximizing reach and impressions and all of those like fancy buzzwords that make people's eyes glaze over in staff meetings. And kind of like investing your time and understanding those things as well, that's what really can make the difference. So like in 10 months, I grew our digital following by 20% without using any kind of like paid techniques. And that's something that's achievable if you just have good content, but having the technical knowledge that I got from doing things like working on certifications, like, you know, taking webinars that interested me, it kind of helps push you to the next level.
So, like, how many of you guys have heard of the analogy of like the T, where like the wideness of the T is all the different things you know, and then like the stock of the T is like how much you know about one subject? Anybody heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, well, XA graduate, he like graduated the first year of the XA like graduating class. I met with him last year to kind of figure out like where I wanted to go with XA and different things like that, and he gave me this analogy of the T and how XA is really good at being really wide on the T. So you take a class in project management, you take some classes in writing, you take this class in web development, you take 410 in web development. So you're really good at the wide, which it really helps with communication with wide ranges of things. So like you can communicate with the marketing team, you can communicate with the development team, you can communicate with the business team and stakeholders and things like that. But what industry is looking for really is how well you are or how good you are at one specific thing and how well you can do that. And so XA is really good, but you got to go outside of class and kind of figure out what you want to do and really get that stock, because that will take you far and get in there. But like with all the different skills that XA gives you, being able to communicate, once you get in there and show that you're willing to work hard at that length of that T, where XA comes in really handy is being able to communicate with people, which will help you move up and kind of give you some leadership skills that will, like, other people at work will recognize, and then you get better opportunities because of that. So like my biggest tip is like classes don't teach you what you like necessarily need to know, everything you need to know. They kind of give you an idea of what you should be learning and where you should be going to learn it and how to learn it, but you really have to go out on your own and kind of like learn everything on your own, if that makes sense.
And I think also like being out in a professional space, like it's okay if you don't know something for your job, just know where to look to find the answer. Like that was the biggest challenge that I had in my first job, was like feeling this really intense pressure, like I needed to know everything, and like if I didn't know the answer to something, like if my boss came to me with a question or like asked me about like something with one of our marketing pieces or something with the website, if I didn't know the answer, like I panicked and felt like I like completely failed. And what I took from that experience into my new experience is knowing how to say, oh, well, I'm not sure, you know, let me go find the answer for you. And knowing where to look, like knowing enough about, you know, a little bit of everything, kind of like the length of the T, where you know kind of where to go to find that depth if you don't have it right at that moment.
Kind of building off that, if somebody comes to you and is like, hey, can you do this? Be like, well, I don't really know how to, but I'll try to figure it out. And that's really all that, and show the effort towards it. And as like student being an intern, they just want to see you take the initiative. You don't have to do it perfect every time, unless like you're working on Facebook's front end and you're pushing production code or something like that. But if any of you guys are, let me know, because that's sweet.
Yeah. And in a healthy work environment, the same should hold true. Like most of the time, any kind of, you know, mistake that you make, anything that might potentially get missed, like no one's probably gonna die. Like my mom and I were literally just having this conversation yesterday. Just, you know, knowing how to own up to that, and, you know, like just being able to say like, okay, well, you know, like this went wrong, or I didn't know this, like this is what I'm gonna do next time, or like, you know, let's work on finding a solution together. Like any healthy work environment is gonna be open to working on finding solutions together and just wanting to help you succeed. That kind of deviated a little bit, but.
What has, like, in your current jobs, like, what has been, like, the biggest struggle that you've come across?
Biggest struggle.
I can go first.
Yeah, you go first.
So, I guess, like, the biggest struggle for me, this, like, class is coming at a weird time, I think is, like, struggling with team communication. So it's really hard to be successful in any kind of creative role, in any kind of like, you know, communication-centric role, because even like those of you who want to go into development, who want to be more on the website and less like, and on the coding side versus the content side, like is still at the root of it, you're communicators and you're building things to, you know, talk in one way or another to, you know, people. When you don't have good communication in your team, that is like the biggest struggle. I've found that even if you're in a team where you're all doing something new for the very first time and you're all kind of like, you know, in that space where you're like, okay, I don't have the answer, but I know where to go to find it, like let's figure it out. If you're in a team that is good at communicating and open to the collaboration, open to problem solving and supporting one another, like that's a lot more conducive to success. And I think one of the biggest struggles that I experience is this feeling of being very kind of like siloed in, and it's difficult. Like we don't really have that across our whole team. And so like sometimes I interface more with people in other departments than I do like with my own manager and with other members of my team, and it can be difficult to kind of break down that barrier, and that makes it really hard to even just like achieve your own goals and to be effective in your job, because even though, you know, things like web development, even things like social media, you know, sometimes you can kind of think of it as, you know, like a very solitary thing where you're like looking at the computer and working on your stuff. Like if you don't have the support of your team, and if you don't have that dialogue to make sure everyone's on the same page, it's really easy to have that breakdown.
The hardest part for me, I'd say, is just trying to persevere through like development issues sometimes. Like sometimes when you're trying to figure things out, especially like being self-taught and different things like that, like you don't know exactly what's going wrong, you don't know where to find it, and you can sometimes spend like 16, 20 hours trying to figure out what's going wrong and why you can't figure it out, and it's really frustrating. And it's like, I hate it sometimes, but then once you get it, it's really great. You just gotta know to stick with it and persevere. Like you could do 50 Google searches on Stack Overflow and not find the right answer, but then you change one word in the sentence and then you find the right answer, and then it's the greatest feeling ever when you do get it. But just remember that like even like the best engineer at Apple, like they run into bugs, like even stupid bugs where like they spelled a word wrong or something and they can't find it for 2 hours. It's just like, I read an article this morning about like you know, when somebody comes up to you and is like, hey, can you do this task? How long will it take you? Like building a fence, like you kind of already know, like you've built a couple fences before, blah, blah, blah. But development, websites, and software, like you could literally run into a problem and then be stuck on it for 2 days, whereas like you missed that one problem, you could have got it done in 12 hours.
Yeah, I think also kind of like a funny challenge, because I feel like my answer was a little heavy. Having a really bad in-house CMS, where like sometimes you just want to be able to go in and fix the code yourself because something is stupid and not working right, but not being able to do it. Like yesterday I was having an issue where like all of the content on a page was bolding, and I kept going into the source code and removing the additional strong tag, and it wasn't fixing it because of the way that our CMS is like coded, and we have to use it because it was developed in-house by our for-profit subsidiary. And so finally I literally had to go through this page and just like unbold each individual thing in like the content creation thing. So it was like going through a Word document and like highlighting everything and unbolding it instead of just removing the one tag that was the problem. So you will run into that, and it sucks. And then you just go to the bakery down the street and get like 3 cookies.
Always a good solution.
Yeah.
Would you say that internships and jobs will become more common in the field in like the next few years?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's almost like a professional disadvantage to not have any kind of knowledge of digital spaces. Like the amount of jobs that I run across that aren't even like social media or web content specific, that want you to have basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, that want you to have an understanding of usability. And I think as the world just becomes increasingly digital and the way that we communicate with one another, as technology just continues to advance, there's just going to be more of a demand for people who know how to communicate in those spaces, how to build those spaces, how to analyze those spaces. Yeah.
Me and my dad kind of bond over the stock market a little bit. We kind of like talk about stocks and stuff. And he was telling me, it was either Monday or Tuesday, that for the first time in history since they've been tracking unemployment and stuff, there's actually more available jobs than there are people to fill them right now. And also like this stock guy who keeps track of all the stocks now, every base of a company now is like software and IT. Like Domino's, they claim they're an IT company that sells pizza because every single like service that you're going to now, like you're interacting with software one way or another. Even if like you as like you're working with your client, you're not touching software at all, you're still going back on your computer, writing emails and doing stuff. Like everything is based on software. So as I want to say, I saw a stat from maybe it was Harvard Business Review, over the next 5 years there'll be like 1.4 million related computer jobs and only 400,000 computer science graduates to fill those positions.
Yeah, and I remember when I was graduating, I had a big issue of like I majored in like an arts major, and I came from like a family who all majored in like business, and at the time I was dating a vet, and everyone was like, oh my god, you're going to be unemployed forever. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know if this is still true, it was true when I graduated a couple years ago, but the College of Arts and Letters has the highest placement rate of any college at Michigan State. So like that's including all of like, you know, the STEM majors and all of that. And I think something that's really special about people who are in the professional writing program, people who are in the XA program, is that you're not just learning the development side, you're not just learning kind of like the coding skills and the technical skills, you're also learning how those work as communication pieces. You're learning how to communicate your ideas effectively. You're learning project management. So you're learning kind of like this holistic picture that is really attractive to employers, and like you're learning how to kind of like market yourself. So you're in a really awesome position of power where you've got the right kind of skills for a ton of jobs. Like that was honestly the biggest struggle for me when I graduated, was that I was qualified and met the requirements for a lot of job descriptions, but I didn't really know what direction I wanted to focus in. So figure that out if you can, because it's a lot easier to be applying to like one type of job than trying to like apply to 500 different kinds and not really knowing who you are anymore after you've submitted like 500 resumes. So you guys are in a really great position, and you're going to be really professionally attractive to a lot of employers.
I give one tip, like try to get an internship doing something that you think you're interested in now. You know, take a couple of days out of the week. Don't go to the bar one day of the week. Go and do that, because not only do you learn like the sort of stuff that you want to do, but you also learn the stuff you don't want to do, which arguably is more valuable than the things you do want to do. I've had a couple of internships where it was like, why did I ever work there? And now I know what to look for in an interview when I'm asking about certain work cultures and different things, and pick up on other things. And I would have never known that if I didn't have those sort of internship experiences. And it's really helped me kind of in my internship search and job search.
Yeah, and employers really like to see the kind of like book knowledge of your program, and then see you having attempted to apply it, because obviously it builds your resume from a professional experience standpoint, but it's also showing that you were making the effort while you were in school to try out those things and to apply what you were learning to kind of like reinforce it. Internships are great.
I promise it's super helpful. Like you're in this class right now and you have an internship, you learn something, you can go apply it and show it, and then you have another portfolio piece right then and there, and then you didn't forget about it and everything. So having an internship, working a couple days a week, and then going to class, literally everything that you're learning in these classes, you'll be able to apply to that internship if it's the right internship, I guess. But like, it helps you learn the stuff so much better and get an actual like solid understanding that helps you explain it to employers in interviews.
Yeah.
What kind of additional certifications, like post-grad, do you think are important to have?
That kind of depends. Honestly, it really depends on what you're doing and what your long-term goals are. So when I left my first job and started my current job, I guess kind of like these first few years post-grad for me have been kind of like a process of figuring out what my long-term goals are and what I really enjoy doing, because I know that like I enjoy communications, I enjoy marketing, and I enjoy that kind of work, but I didn't know until I was in a position where I was doing kind of everything that really I like focusing in on digital spaces. And so I think as far as certifications and those kind of like post-grad professional development and continuing education things, just kind of like once you're finding what you enjoy about your job, like what you see wanting to be doing in the future, like thinking about where you want to be in a couple of years. Like I hate the question, where do you want to be in 5 years? I don't know. But if you can kind of like think ahead a little bit, then you can start kind of like researching what types of continuing education and certification programs fit with that. So once I knew that I really connected with working in social media, I really connected with digital spaces, that's when I started researching like social marketing certifications, and I did one through Hootsuite, because Hootsuite is the social media management platform that I use. I got an AdWords certification, and I'm working on analytics just because, and that's something actually I would recommend for most people, because Google Analytics is something that's really useful, and a lot of jobs that I've seen in the field want you to have some knowledge of that. Just because I wanted a little bit more technical knowledge of how like paid digital advertising works. I want the technical knowledge of being able to understand the analytics and assess how effective our digital spaces are. Also like researching conferences. I just went to the Digital Summit in Detroit. It's October, so it was beginning of September. And that's really helpful. Like if you can find a conference that really speaks to you, even if there's just a handful of sessions, that can be one of the most valuable things, like from a networking standpoint, from a learning standpoint. I learned so much about search engine optimization, about integrating SEO-friendly content with paid advertising content, about like understanding algorithms for content, understanding analytics. So it kind of depends.
And what?
Oh, I was just gonna say I would consider getting this web accessibility certification, but I was talking to the now director of accessibility at University of Michigan about this, and he said you really only need it if you plan on doing consulting work and stuff. So like, say you're doing a web development job, but maybe your title isn't accessibility anything, but you kind of focus on accessibility. Like, it's really beneficial to have that if you want to move into a consulting role, because other companies that don't really know anything about development or accessibility, like it's something they see and they can look at and be like, oh, they actually know what they're doing. But other than that, like I don't really see a need for a certification. The industry, like technology and development industry, moves so quickly. By the time anybody developed a certification for it, like it's just going to be out of style.
Yeah.
And then in your areas of work, what skills, specific or general, do you find to be must-haves?
I think like communication and problem solving. I think the nature of digital spaces, kind of playing off what you said about them changing so quickly, is that you can be skilled in working in digital spaces, but still kind of recognize that your knowledge is kind of like always in a process of like planned obsolescence, where it's only basically you're like constantly learning on the job. So knowing how to problem solve because things are always changing, knowing how to be flexible, and being patient, because there are times where you're looking at a specific tag in a string of code, or you're just trying to figure out what the problem is, and it's something that should take 5 minutes, but it takes 5 hours. I think those are important. Also just like being creative and being like compassionate when you're working with other people, because as fun as communications are, as fun as digital spaces can be to play with, it can also be really stressful. So knowing kind of how to remember that like you're still working with a team of human beings, that can be really hard when you've been like staring at a computer for like 5 hours and you're so frustrated, like you can't figure out what's happening, like the CEO is yelling at you, like your boss is yelling at you, your editor is yelling at you because this thing needs to be done. Just kind of like, yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, like I say that like I'm joking, but last week literally I went to the bakery 5 times, like, which might be indicative of a personal problem, but we're not going to go there. So I think just kind of like problem solving, flexibility, and communication. If you've got those skills, which are things that they cultivate for you in these programs, then you'll be successful in a lot of professional environments, because you've got the technical skills, and if you've got those kind of like human skills to know how to communicate them and how to solve problems when you run into them. Yeah.
For me, it has to be a strong foundation in accessibility related to development. It's super important, and if you guys all get a chance, go on the Teach Access Study Away. It's probably the coolest thing I've done while in college. We got to go to California and go to Facebook, Yahoo, Adobe, Microsoft, and Google, and we got to go and see their campuses and visit and meet with all the professionals and learn about different things. But it extends out of the industry realizing that, like, by law and just like the ethically right thing to do, people with disabilities are being left out of like these products like Facebook that we take for granted every day. And so they see, like, as people coming in there, only 5% of like the people coming in have ever even heard of accessibility related to development. And so when we were at Oath, which is Verizon bought Yahoo and then changed it to Oath, we were there. We got to meet the guy who was on the he was a project manager for the first iMac, the first iPhone, and the first 3 iPads, and then the guy who changed Stephen Hawking's chair over from Microsoft to Linux. But Oath these guys worked at Oath. They told us that they had 2,300 intern applicants last summer. 20 of them on their resumes had the word accessibility. All 20 got a call. So it's like super, super beneficial thing to learn. It's really rewarding. You get to help a lot of people, and there's a huge need for it in the industry. Like, I mean, I'm interviewing with companies where like the guy sitting next to me is a computer science major who's been studying computer science for super long, but just because I have that accessibility knowledge and they don't have any of that accessibility knowledge, I'm right there with them, even though I'm not as like as strong of a developer, maybe don't have as good of a math background or anything, but because there's such a need for it, it's awesome.
With so many people within the same professional field, how do you make yourself stand out?
Strong foundation and accessibility.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, you guys are learning web development right now, and like if you learn how to do it accessibly, that'll be the foundation of how you build everything, and so you'll be building from the ground up accessibly, which saves you a lot of time and effort and frustration, because going back to code that a developer wrote that had zero idea about making anything accessible is like, excuse my language, but it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
It sucks. Like, that's probably the worst part about my job, is trying to fix other people's code, and it's bad.
So I think, man, that's like a loaded question. It is really hard, and I think that's something that I didn't really learn until after I graduated, how to make myself stand out, and I think it's difficult, especially because I don't know if this is just like, you know, a professional writing thing, or if it's like just an everyone thing. The biggest challenge that I had when it came to starting to apply for jobs is like, I was really good at, you know, writing things that sounded nice, but I was really bad at kind of like owning my achievements and showcasing those. So I think it was my document design professor. I was working with him on a web design project, and I asked him if he'd be willing to like look over my resume and help me, because I wasn't getting a lot of return on like job applications. Like, I had been applying to a ton of things and I wasn't getting a lot of callbacks, even though I knew I was qualified. And he looked at my resume and he was like, you know, this is really nice, but it looks like every other resume out there, like, you don't have any, like you haven't displayed any of the achievements that you've had here. So we started kind of talking through some of my professional experiences, and, you know, I'm talking about like, you know, percentage growth, like I'm talking about opportunities where I was able to like lead a project, where I was able to facilitate something, help design something, and he's like, well, why is none of this on your resume? And I kept saying things like, well, you know, like, but it was part of a team, like, you know, it was fine, like, what? And he's like, no, like, this is your spot to like be selfish and to showcase yourself, and, you know, to like own your achievements, and you need to be able to do that. And I think also just like taking the time when you're like looking at a job application, like take a minute to look through and look at the skills that they're looking for, look at the responsibilities you'll have, tweak your resume, tweak your cover letters to match those. Like something that I do, it's really old school, but like I print out the job description, and with job responsibilities, I highlight like the responsibilities that they're looking for, and then I go through and I match them to professional experiences that I've had before, and I tweak the language that I use to describe those experiences on my resume if I have to. Now I've kind of like gotten better about really refining down the types of jobs that I'd be looking for, and knowing how they tend to talk about those things, so I don't have to tweak it as much. And then in your cover letter, where you're talking about the skills that you have, not the things that you've done, like your resume, then I go through, do the same thing. I highlight the skills they're looking for, and I match them to a professional opportunity, and I make sure those words are in my cover letter. And then in the cover letter, like, you know, first paragraph, you talk about what attracted you to the position and the experience that you have. Second paragraph, and third, if you need to, like, talk about the skills that you have that match what they're looking for. And then your final paragraph, say like, hey, this is a great fit. I have the skills you're looking for. Like, I'm interested in this because of this. So if you can match what you have to the need that they want to fill, and if you can throw in like something about the job or about the company or the area that you're passionate about, then that can help you stand out because it shows, number one, that you're doing your research about the company, about the position that you're looking for, but also like, you know, it shows that you have some kind of personal investment. So like, I'm really interested in like social responsibility and, you know, like helping support communities. So something that I emphasized when I was applying to the Credit Union League was how like a fundamental like pillar of the mission of credit unions is to support their communities, and like the like philosophy for credit unions is literally people helping people. And so I mentioned that in my cover letter, and that helped kind of like connect, you know, me who had the skills to fill their need with the actual mission of the company, which is to support credit unions. It's a lot of work. Like honestly, job searching done right is exhausting. But once I started applying those things, once I started actually using my resume as an achievement showcase space, like the return that I got on interviews was like exponentially different. Like I was getting a call back for like over half, probably at least 2/3 of jobs that I was applying for because I knew how to represent myself well.
One more thing, when I was out in California, I also got told that like 85% of jobs don't come from like just supplying a resume, but somebody you know or somebody you know that knows somebody there. So just talk to people, like ask them questions about what they do. You know, maybe like they might not even be anywhere close to you, but they have a friend that worked there or did that. So just talk to people, stay networked. Also, I'm a firm believer in there always will be somebody smarter than you, but the only thing you control is that you can work harder than them. And don't just be busy, but try to find things that will be impactful and spend a lot of time on those.
Yeah, honestly, in terms of like connections, like that's super important. Like pretty much anytime you're applying to something, if you know someone who you even think might know someone, just like, you know, drop an email, say like, hey, you know, just like touching base, you know, whatever, like I applied for this position, I think it's a good fit for my skills, like here's my resume, if you know anyone you can pass my name along to, that would be really helpful. I literally sent one of those emails yesterday. And so like taking the time to, number one, cultivate those connections, but also maintain them. So like, you know, take the time to go and grab drinks with someone who you've worked with, like, you know, solidify those relationships so then you have that foundation there. So when you're in a position where you're applying for a job and you want a reference, you want to have your name passed along, then it's not something where, you know, you're only contacting someone when you need something. Like you've cultivated those relationships and maintained them. I still stay in contact with several professors that I had in this department, and that has been a huge help as well, even just sometimes like finding jobs. Because if someone knows someone or knows someone who knows someone, like that's always going to be a huge benefit because the job market is super saturated. And if you have the added benefit of someone vouching for the skills that you know that you have, that can sometimes be what makes the difference.
What are some ways to make your portfolio stand out?
Take the initiative to do a project that you care about or something else. Don't just show like your class projects. Take some interest, you know, like you're wearing a baseball hat, so say you like baseball a lot and you go build a website just to show like stats or add, you know, you figure out some JavaScript and you write a little app just to like keep track of the score, just like little things like that, you know, or like come up with some crazy idea and then like go through the process of how you would design it and then just showcase how you would do that. Just real key is like you just can't show your class projects because everyone's doing that. You got to show something that you care about, that you take interest in, and then other people can like follow that. Other people follow like stories and stuff, things that you've done. They're not just going to be like, hey, look, I built this website for class, and be like, awesome. Like you got to do something to separate yourself from other people.
Shows that you're like genuinely passionate about it rather than just like
Yep.
And also like even the way that you talk about class projects, like I remember in my portfolio seminar, learning to talk about them like as professional experiences and versus just like, I did this thing for class because my professor told me to and I wanted to get a good grade. A kind of, you know, like talking about the professional value, talking about the skills that you exercised, And I think for like any of you writers in there, like any people who are interested in editing, something that was really helpful for me in standing out with that aspect of my portfolio, like show your editing process. And that can be true also for people like working on web design projects. Like show the iterations that something went through, like show where you started and where you ended. If you can, show your process documents, and that's a huge help because then that's giving potential employers, potential clients, like, if you're going to grad school, potential like professors and colleagues, like it's kind of giving them insight into your work process, which can be just as valuable as the end product that you get to, is showing how you got there.
Something a lot of employers look for as well is, so you made an app and then you showed that you built the app, but what did you go back and look at to see what you might have gone wrong with or what you could have changed? Like, they really look for that last little bit of like, hey, I went back and saw that, Google Analytics, something was going weird, so then I went back and fixed it. They really look for, you're not just throwing up a website and then forgetting about it. Like, you're really able to, like, identify the mistakes you made and correct them.
And how did you go about building your own unique brand?
To be honest, I don't know. I just kind of didn't really try to do anything like that. Just yeah.
I think actually like mine, like I went through a lot of iterations. Like I think about the personal website that I built in 2010 and like my personal website now, and it is so different. Man, that's kind of like a hard process to describe. I think a lot of it is like, it can come as you get more grounded in who you are as a professional. Like once I had a clearer sense of my professional self and like what I was passionate about, what I was interested in, and kind of like how I wanted to be seen, that helped me a little bit more. I think also kind of like letting go of like worrying about stereotypes or what I think like people want to see from me. Like I don't know, a big thing, I guess, an example with that on my portfolio website, the iteration prior to how it is now, I made this really deliberate choice. I had a script font and I had a pink accent color, and I was like really nervous about that for a long time because I present very feminine, obviously, and I was worried about not being taken as seriously if I like owned that part of my personality. But then I realized that that was kind of like inhibiting a lot of the strengths that I had in terms of like, being fun, like, being playful, being able to like all of these positive things, because I was so worried about being perceived negatively. And so I made this really deliberate choice, like, okay, like this is something that represents me because of like X, whatever. And then I ended up changing it just because kind of like my professional identity morphed a little bit. So I think just kind of like taking an honest look at even like something that I did when I was going through the process of building a more effective resume, like looking at the skills that you have and the passions that you have, and then find people who are in the industry, who have those kind of skills, who have those kind of interests, and see how they're presenting yourself, and how they're presenting themselves. And don't be afraid to like change frequently. Like my website after I graduated, I went through probably like 2 or 3 changes in the last couple of years since I graduated, just because like I was still kind of finding that balance. So there's not really a perfect answer. It just kind of is like, you'll know when it's the right fit. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like when you're buying a winter coat and you're like trying to find one that's warm enough. You're trying to find one that, fits right. Like, when you found the right one. So, yeah.
Since experience architecture can be such like a broad topic, how do you respond when employers ask what it is?
Usually I respond by saying it's not building houses, It's focused a lot in user-centered design, and it's kind of broad. We do classes in project management, prototyping, writing, and user research, but basically what it boils down to is like user experience design, but not focused on digital spaces, but more a broad sense. So I like to give the example of like Ashton Keyes. He graduated last year. He uses the XA major to help his fashion brand and stuff. And there's other people who use it for interior design, but really it's taking things and making it easier to use for humans.
What's something you wish you knew as an undergrad, but now, like these, tips or advice you give to us?
I think it's okay to not know what you want to do, and it's okay even if like your first couple of jobs aren't like the perfect fit. And also just like, be confident in the skills that you have. I think something that was really hard for me was like knowing that even though I was still a student, and even though like I had just graduated, like the breadth of professional experiences I was able to have, in large part because of this major, like even just projects that I did in class, like the real tangible professional experience I got from those things is hugely valuable. And I think it's really hard, number one, just like as a generally good person, it can be really hard to talk about yourself and be proud and own your achievements like I was talking about before. But I think also just like being brand new in a professional space and being able to be proud of those things and own that you already have this really valuable experience, it can be like intimidating, and it can be scary to know how to do that. So just like being okay with like your expertise and yourself, and also knowing like it might take a few tries before you find the right job. Like I recently applied to something, and it was the first time that I saw a job description where I felt like I could have called it like a dream job. And so knowing that moment came like almost 3 years after I graduated, that's totally fine. And then that can be super helpful actually. Like if you can find a job description that to you feels like it's your dream job, keep that. Like see what they're looking for that you don't have. Like see what they're looking for that you do have, and use that as kind of like a barometer for growth. Like use that when you're looking for other jobs to apply to. Like that's super helpful. Like I literally just figured that out probably like 2 months ago, and now I keep it on my desk and I use that to kind of like help guide when I'm looking for other opportunities.
And you can like look at like if you because so many people have professional portfolio websites.
Yeah.
You can look at who currently has that job and look at what experience they have. So it's kind of direct, like, oh, maybe I could, maybe I should get this professional development.
Yeah, like look at other portfolio websites. Like look at people in your industry. Like look at the people that you want to be. See how they're presenting themselves. See what kind of projects they're doing that you might want to take a stab at. Like see if there are people that you can, collaborate with. If you can take a freelance project and just, kind of like dabble in something, do that. Like just do as much as you can. And like if you're in an imperfect work environment, like if you're in a job that just isn't totally what you want to be doing, like if you aren't part of an effective team, like if you're not happy, if you're in an unhealthy environment, something that can be really helpful in making sure that you're still doing the best that you can in that situation, because it's really hard to it's really easy to stagnate when you're in that kind of situation, when you're not being given like the resources you need and the support you need to really thrive and be successful. Focus on bettering yourself. Like focus on what you can get for yourself out of that experience and what you can do to help yourself get to where you want to be. Like that's like when I started researching certifications, that was why, because I felt like where I was right then wasn't serving me. So it wasn't serving, my position. I wasn't being the best that I could be. So if you can kind of shift your mindset and look at it as a learning experience and think about what you can do to be better for next time, that's hugely valuable. And it's hard, but it's super valuable.
My biggest tip is look for a job on campus. You get to know your professors, you kind of get to learn how they think about how they're teaching the classes, which helps you learn in the classes and get good grades in the classes. But also, like, all your professors are well connected in the industry and have different opportunities they can send your way and stuff. And if you don't make friends with your professors and stuff like that, then you're out of a good opportunity.
Yeah.
And what advice would you have to new XA students?
To what?
To new XA students?
Just dive in, start learning stuff, figure out what interests you. If research interests you, go grab a book, read it on your own, try to do something, try to get involved, find a place where, you know, you can do some user research or do some web development, you know, like go on CodePen, just look at different stuff. Like if you're looking on different ways how to build a contact form, go on CodePen, look at them, compare and contrast how people are using different things, because sometimes it might look good on the front end, but as far as the code is concerned, it's crap. So you just kind of got to compare and contrast and just, you know, go on your favorite website, click inspect, see how they built it.
Yeah, just like push yourself. Like no one's gonna do it for you. Like a good professor might encourage that, like encourage you to push yourself, but no one's gonna do it for you. Like, you know, find what you like. You know, take an internship, even if you hate it, then find a new one. Just like use your time while you're here and while you have the resources, while you have the support, while you have the investment of professors, of employers, like who want to see you succeed and want to help cultivate you as a professional. Use this time to its fullest. Like when I was in college, I was so busy. Like honestly, my senior year was a blur. Like I really rarely like went out or did any of that kind of stuff. But but I mean, I still had a lot of fun. Like I'm not trying to say that I was like boring. But I think like I really feel like I got every single thing that I could out of my experience here. Like I had internships, I had jobs, I like participated in research, I did a study away, a study abroad, I was working with professors, I started freelancing, and you know, I was learning things outside of class that were related to class because I wanted to be further along than I was at that moment. I think like the more that you can push yourself and just like really go that extra mile, if not for your professor, if not for a class, for yourself, then that makes a huge difference. Like that put me like, you know, if here's like the starting line for a marathon after you graduate, that helped put me at a head start because number one, I had the work ethic because I'd been pushing myself, but also like I'd taken that time to get to know myself as a professional and as who I wanted to be when I was done with school.
Super great too when you're going out to have fun and you're like, wow, I did a bunch of stuff this week, versus like you're going out to have fun, you're like, oh, I have this homework to do, that homework to do and stuff. So the more motivated you are and the more on top of things you are, like going out's going to be more fun too.
It's so gratifying. Like when you solve a huge problem in code, like when you finish a big paper, like when you've had a really awesome week at your internship, it's so gratifying then when you're like going to hang out with your friends. You're like, yeah, like I earned this. Awesome. Yeah.
So there were a lot of questions that I kind of crossed out just to make sure we got to the main topic. So if your question hasn't gotten answered and you selected it, now's the chance if you're willing to ask it.
What's the best way to represent programming skills on a resume?
Just talk about the different things you do. Like I know on my resume I did a software development internship this summer, and one of the things I did was help set up a server to integrate open SSL certifications, which is basically like a private key letting like computers know that it's a secure connection. So like I did that, that's the bullet point on my resume. And so just like doing that, and like say there's another internship experience where I was working for like a marketing agency and I was doing accessibility reviews of like their 30 websites. So it's literally just like audited 30 websites for accessibility. And so you just got to do that. Just literally be blunt about the sort of work you've done.
Work experience in it, and you just like have like general like self-taught knowledge.
Yep. So I mean, like even if you don't have any work experience, just self-taught knowledge. Like have a project section on your resume. Be like build portfolio project using HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript or something, like, or you know, like just have an other section. Maybe you have one project and you present it at a conference or something. Just don't be just focused on just your job experiences, but like if you don't have a lot of job experience, like think about all the different projects that are applicable to like the job that you're trying to get.
Yeah, and like again, for my writers who I think are like kind of all back there, same kind of thing. So I have a section for my work experience and education, but then I also have certifications, I've got publications, and I have presentations that I've given about things that are professionally relevant. So like those things are professional experience as well. Things like projects, things like publications.
You have a lot of good questions. I didn't even. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Are you open if students want to email you if they have kind of follow-up questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This is like a gold mine of information. So yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I gotta run, but feel free to email me, guys, or find me, come up and talk to me. It doesn't matter, but see you guys.
I mean, same. Like, I'm not on campus, but I respond very well to email. Like, if you guys want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's a thing, right? That's still relevant.
Yeah.
I should know that. That's terrible that I had to ask that.
Let's see, in 5 minutes it might not be a thing.
I mean, honestly, like, yeah.
Right. Well, it was great meeting you too. It was great to meet you. Have a good day.